Welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering people through storytelling and education. And I know last week at the beginning of the episode, I was telling you how my household has been hit with sickness. Tula is still so congested. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to deal with. I just really have a heart for all the moms out there who have sick babies, because it's like you just feel so helpless. And we didn't really go through that. I mean, Jovi was in the NICU, which we're going to talk about the NICU on today's podcast. But there was also nurses caring for her. There was nothing in my control or anything I could have done to help. But with Tula, she's just at home. Like last night, I slept 3 hours total because she was so congested that it was so loud. And then every time I tried to nurse her, she couldn't nurse because she was so congested. And we've been to the pediatrician 3 times in the last 2 weeks. And it's just like, oh my gosh. And they say that babies can't have allergies either, which I don't know if that's true or not, but allergies are going around crazy here right now. So I just want to say, if your kids are sick, I feel for you. I'm in it with you, and it sucks. But we will get through it. I just keep telling myself that she's building her little immune system and that she's getting stronger. So that's, I guess, how we just get through it. I'm excited about today's episode. We have on Dr. Heather Evans, and I'll let her tell you all about herself. But she has an interesting story from a pelvic floor therapist, but also a twins story. She had premature twins and just learned a lot with her babies in the NICU and being a pelvic floor therapist and how it kind of all comes together. So we're going to dive right into the episode. All right, everyone. I have on Dr. Heather Evans here, and I'm super excited to talk to her. I literally was telling Vito the other night, I'm like, I need to bring on a pelvic floor therapist again. And I had booked this like forever ago. And I think like back in January, we had booked this podcast. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm interviewing one tomorrow. Because I was like, who's this Heather lady? Who am I interviewing tomorrow? I'm like, oh my gosh, she's a pelvic floor therapist. So this is like perfect timing. But she has an incredible story, just kind of sharing about she had twins when they were born, NICU stay, and then obviously like what she's doing now and how she just has a heart for people in that postpartum period, especially if your kids are in the hospital. How do you take care of yourself? How do you make that time? Because you know, she's going to share it. But if you have kids in the NICU, it seems like you live there. So I'm super excited to hear from her and to share everything that, or have her share everything that she went through and everything that she does. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And anytime I can help out any new mamas, that's always my goal. So yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'd love for you to start like from the beginning. I know you said that you were a pelvic floor therapist before you had your twins,
right.
But that kind of played into your recovery and then into like what you're doing now. So I'd love for you to just share your story with us.
Yeah, so I've been a pelvic floor physical therapist for probably about 14 years now. And my husband and I got married back in 2009, and we pretty much started trying to grow our family pretty much right away, but we ran into some infertility issues. And so we battled infertility for about 4 years. So we ended up having 4 IVF cycles. And then our last IVF cycle was using an egg donor. And that was actually the one that worked. And so I got pregnant, and I was pregnant with a little boy and a little girl. And everything throughout the beginning of the pregnancy was very normal. You know, I wasn't even that sick. I was a little nauseous here and there, but really I felt great considering that I was pregnant with twins. And so what happened, everything changed at about 21 weeks. And so what happened was I went into the hospital for just a routine check. And what they found out was that my cervix was what they called funneling. So it was actually dilating from the top. So it was shortening, which can be really dangerous because of preterm labor. And I felt 100%. I felt completely fine. So I had no idea. I had no contractions, nothing. I expected to go right back to work after that appointment that day.
What were your symptoms then that led you to get checked?
I basically had a really amazing OB. So he had been with us throughout our entire infertility journey. So he knew basically how hard it had been for us to get there. And then he knew that we were having twins, so we were just a little bit more high risk. And we had done the regular appointment, the heartbeat check, we'd done the tummy sonogram, and he just wanted to be on the safe side. So he asked for a transvaginal ultrasound. And that test was the only thing that told us that anything was wrong. So basically that test really changed the outcome of everything from there. So I just got really lucky with a really overprotective doctor, basically. So yeah, so then they basically just followed it every couple days. And so I went home on bed rest, and they said, come back in a couple days and we'll recheck it. So I did that. Everything was the same. They said, go home for another couple days, come back and we'll recheck it. And then at that point, when they rechecked it and I still felt normal, the room just kind of became a flurry of activity. They ran and got the doctor. They brought in a wheelchair, and basically it had gotten a lot worse. So my cervix was really, really short at that time. And so the doctor did an exam, and he said I was dilating. I was 100% effaced. And so at this point, this was about 22 weeks and 5 days. And so they're telling me not to push. And I'm saying, why on earth would I push? I don't like, why would I do that? And they're transferring me to the wheelchair and basically just spread me across the parking lot to the hospital, which was right next door. And then they admitted me onto the antepartum unit. So that was a flurry of activity. And it was just so surreal because I expected to go in for a regular doctor's appointment. I had finally gotten used to the fact that I would probably be on bed rest, at least for a while at home. But yeah, things started to move really quickly from there. So
yeah, so that's good that you, I guess, had that provider, Yeah,
he's since retired. He is the most amazing OBGYN. Yeah, he's retired and gone on, and now he travels and does OBGYN work in underserved, women in other countries throughout the world. He's just an amazing, amazing guy. And he definitely was one of the first I always say he's the first of many who saved our kids' lives, 100%.
Yeah. So then what happened? I mean, they rushed you over to the hospital.
So they rushed me over to the hospital at 22 weeks and 5 days, and they were pretty sure the babies were coming that night. They hooked me up to the monitors. Turns out I was actually having contractions at that point. I just, for some reason, couldn't feel them. So they start giving I immediately got some steroid injections to speed up the baby's lung development, because that's the biggest concern is the lungs are just not anywhere near close to developed at that point. There was a medication, I can't remember what it was called. It was not magnesium. That came later, that they could give me for a few days to try to slow the labor. They could only do it for a few days because then it damaged the baby's hearts or something, I think. But they started that, of course, hooked up to the monitors, and then all the specialists started coming in. So the high-risk doctors started coming in. They came down from the NICU. And at the time, so my kids are 8 now. At the time, they did not typically resuscitate 22-weekers. That has actually changed. And so a lot of hospitals, including the one I was at, they will try to save 22-weekers at this point. But back 8 years ago, they typically did not. And so at 23 weeks, they would try to save them if you wanted. And then at 24 weeks, they would try. And so we were 22 and 5. And so once I got settled in and, my husband ran home, fed the pets, grabbed me everything I needed, the phone chargers, all that stuff. And then we had not even chosen names. We'd kind of had some lists of names. We knew it was a boy and a girl, but we were we wanted them to have names no matter what happened. And so we basically stayed awake until we'd picked both of their names. And then the nurses gave me some medication to help sleep. And then I woke up the next morning and the babies hadn't come that night. So everybody was really surprised. Basically with the support they gave me in antepartum, I was able to stay pregnant for about 10 more days, which made all the difference pretty much.
We are going to take a quick break from this episode. I don't know about you guys, but we live outside Chicago, which means it's just now finally starting to feel like summer outside. And we have so many parties to go to. We have graduations and birthdays and just tons of stuff going on right now. And we could bring a salad to the party, or I could show up with a milk bar cake. and you could too, like the amazing person that you are, and wow everybody. Milk Bar is the perfect gift for anyone and everyone in your life, from birthdays to graduations, summer cookouts, or just because they are freaking delicious. A few of their best sellers include their signature birthday cake with unfrosted sides, the salty sweet compost cookie, Milk Bar pie. Also, for a limited time, they're offering their new strawberry shortcake and cake truffles, which are so good. I ate a lot of them in the last couple of weeks. So my mom was recently in town and we ordered a Milk Bar cake. I got the strawberry shortcake and we wanted to sing happy birthday to her before she left. And so we did that, and the cake was so good. I may or may not have eaten most of it because it was so delicious. I highly recommend the strawberry shortcake. And every single creation that they make is fresh, and it's thoughtfully and beautifully packaged. So when it arrives in perfect condition, you can just eat it and enjoy it. They offer fast, even overnight, nationwide delivery. And right now, Milk Bar has a special limited time offer. Get $10 off any order of 50 or more when you go to milkbarstore.com/mamas. You'll get $10 off an order of $50 by going to milkbarstore.com/mamas. That's milkbarstore.com/mamas. Now back to the episode.
I have a question quick. Like, what was your mentality being 22 and 5, knowing that if the babies came that they would not resuscitate?
I think my body was in such fight or flight. I was processing it, but I don't think I was processing it at the same time. And I think some part of me, and this is so strange, I was just like, okay, this is, and I don't know if it was I think that my medical background was good and bad, because it was good because I had knowledge, but it was also not good because I knew what it looked like if kids, if they made it, but if they were born too early, I had seen results of prematurity and things like that. So I also could actually kind of picture what our lives might be like. And so, but I think I just took it minute by minute, and there was no day by day. It was just minute by minute. And somehow I think my brain just kind of protected me, where it was okay, you're not even going to think this through. You're just going to they say, take this medicine, you take this medicine. And after a few days, things stabilized. And they said, okay, we just want you to stay in this hospital as long as you can. And I forget I think their main goal was they were really trying to get me to 28 weeks. And they said they've done it before. So I was like, okay, that's our thing. We're going to be just staying in the hospital until 28 weeks. But they ended up coming at 24. So, I felt completely normal the whole time, which was just really surreal. And they kept running different tests and things and lots of medication. But then the night before they were born, so the night of 24 weeks even, I woke up, and that was the first time I'd actually felt contractions. So I woke up, they were mild. They were not anything like, what someone feels when they're actually delivering a baby, but I could actually feel something to the point where it woke me up. And then I started to have some bleeding. And then at that point from there, everything went really fast again. So I woke up by about 1:30 that morning with contractions. And then they were delivered by emergency C-section at 11:40 and 11:42 that morning. So about 10 hours to get everything, from first contraction to delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then at that point, were they giving you any indication of the state that the babies would be in?
Yes. And so that was hugely helpful. And our NICU, I love our NICU, but they were wonderful about this. And so they would come down. They came down the very first day that we were admitted. And that was the really super hard one. That's when they basically told us, we probably won't try to intubate them. At 23 weeks, they came down with a form and they said, okay, we can try at this point if you want to sign this form. And we were like, absolutely, we'll sign the form. We want you to do anything you can. At 24 weeks, they came and said, okay, now we will try. And then they came down when we knew delivery was coming, and they said, here's what to expect. They won't be able to breathe. They'll have a tube down their throat, hooked to a ventilator. That's 100% for sure. There's no way they're going to be able to breathe at 24 and 1. They're probably going to weigh about this much, which was, they were about 1.5 pounds each when they were born. They're going to have lots of tubes and wires. They're going to have their own nurse, and they're going to have a lot of alarms. So they really prepared us for all of that. They came down with lactation, and because I was so early in the pregnancy, I hadn't decided I didn't know anything about breastfeeding. I hadn't done that research yet. And so they were like, we really recommend that you start pumping immediately. It's really extra important for these babies. And so I said, okay, of course, whatever they need. And so they kind of were setting all that up. So yeah, they actually did an amazing job. I mean, of course it was still scary, but they had basically prepared us for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then they took us at about 11:40.
Yeah. Wow. That is so wild.
Wild.
Like, yeah, like you don't even have time to process it at that point.
No. And I've been in the hospital for 10 days, but then it was still, so I laid around basically for 10 days and then it was still emergency C-section. And they moved us into this room. They basically moved us into the closest labor and delivery room to the operating room because they wanted it to be a C-section so that they can control every aspect as much as they could. But the babies were only 1.5 pounds. And so they were in this room with the warming beds down and everything in case they quote, like said, slipped out. They were just so small, they just slip out. So they were prepared for those babies to just come in that room in case. But they didn't. And so that's when they moved into the OR for the C-section. So, and they told me what was going to happen with that as well. They said, of course, you're not going to be able to hold the baby or anything like that. We'll lift the baby up above the drape. You'll get to see them for kind of a split second. And then they're going to be going to their team. So in the OR, there was my team. So there were the 2 surgeons, the anesthesiologist, all the nurses, everything for me. And then each baby had a team. So each baby had a neonatologist, they had a nurse practitioner, they had a nurse, and they had a respiratory therapist. So each baby had their own team of 4 around their little bed they were going to be on. So there were a lot of people in that room. It was controlled. They knew exactly what all they were doing, but it was definitely an interesting experience. But Hannah was delivered first because she was baby A. She was actually in the head down position. So they delivered her via C-section, of course. They lifted her above the drape. I'll never forget, she was blowing bubbles. One of the doctors had said she tried to give a little cry. I didn't hear it. It was very small. They said that was great that she was even attempting to cry. So she was 1.5 pounds. At that age, their eyes are still fused shut. So their eyes are fused shut. They can't breathe. They immediately intubated her. And then Gavin was born. So my kids are Hannah and Gavin. And then Gavin was born. He was transverse. So he was sideways. So he was more difficult to get out. And what we learned is that little boys often have a harder time in the NICU because their lung development's a little bit slower. So he had the rougher time from the get-go. They took more tries to get to intubate him. They did get it after about the 3rd try, and they did have to give him some chest compressions at birth. His heart was beating. It just was beating very, very slow for a baby. And so he had chest compressions. Same thing. They held him up for a second, whisked him off. They worked on both of them. Then they got Hannah going. They were literally running her bed. We were on the 3rd floor. The NICU was on the 4th floor. So they were running her across the room. They paused at my bed for just a second so I could see her. And the story I always tell is what came to become one of our very favorite nurses. She said, "Congratulations, Mama." And that was the first time I was like, oh my gosh, I am a mom. Because it was just this big medical event. So I'll never forget that. And so they whisked her away. And then finally they got Gavin intubated. And then they, same thing, paused for a second and whisked him away. And then my husband was kind of like, what do I do? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to go with them? Do you want me to stay? And I'm like, no, go with them. And so he went with them. And then it was just me and the OBGYNs. And it just got really quiet as they finished everything up. And they took them up to the NICU and my husband went with them. And then from there, my memories get super hazy, I think, between the drugs and the trauma. And so the next thing I remember is kind of that, the post-op sort of recovery time when he came back down and had pictures and had, their birth weights and things like that. And then that's when we started contacting family and everything and said, they're here, they're tiny and they're fragile, but they are here. So yeah, that's their official birth story.
Is there at any point, like when they came out, were they able to tell you at all, like their chances of making it or not making it, or like any issues that might be seen in the future?
Yeah. So they had this chart. They had this yellow piece of paper. I'll never forget. It was yellow. And they had the number of weeks. Because when we first started, seeing it when I came in at 22 weeks, the number of weeks, gestation. Then they divided it up, boy or girl, twin or not twin. Then they said, did the mom have a chance to get these steroid injections or not before they delivered the baby, which I did. And I can't remember if there was anything else. And then they gave you the percentage of babies that lived and then the babies that lived without a severe disability. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, those numbers went up a little bit. They were pretty bleak, but then they went up a little bit every week. So at 24 weeks, when I delivered, they basically had about a 50-50 chance. So the chance was a little bit better for my daughter, Hannah, as a girl than Gavin. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but like 52 and 48 or something like that. They basically had a 50-50 chance. And then there was a pretty strong chance that if they did live, they might have a severe disability. But none of that they really know, of course, until later. And so the babies were born, and when I really kind of started to understand what it was going to be like and how Gavin was going to have a little bit harder time was probably about 12 hours after they were born. And that's when, so with a C-section, they sit you up at about 12 hours. And so they sat me up, you try to pump, nothing comes out at that point because your body's not prepared to have milk at 24 weeks. They laid me back down about an hour and a half later. So in the middle of the night, they came down and they basically said, Gavin's not doing really well. They didn't think that he was where they were going to lose him, but they had to do a lot. They had to put him on a higher powered vent. They'd had to give him some additional treatments. And they were just letting me know he's here, but he's not doing well. So they didn't give me like a percent at that point, but it wasn't great. And so I had a wonderful postpartum nurse, and she helped me get into the wheelchair and took me up because they take your bed up to see them, which is amazing. They take your entire bed up to the NICU to see them. But I was so groggy and hazy from the C-section, I could barely remember it. So she helped me get in the wheelchair, and she took me up to where I could see them about 12 hours after they were born. And they were very critical. They were, one-on-one nursing. They each had their own nurse constantly with them the whole time. I'd say 50% was a pretty solid, I would have taken a 50 at that point because it seemed even scarier than that. Mm-hmm. So, and then that stayed that way for a while. I mean, they were on ventilators for 7 weeks, and pretty much the whole time they were on ventilators, both of them, but Gavin especially, they were pretty scary. I mean, they went through a lot for those first 7 weeks.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to talk about one of my biggest pet peeves, and that is when you get charged for things that you don't even know you're being charged for, like something that you signed up for, and then all of a sudden it's like, you thought you were getting this $5 item, but it's like, oh, your first is $5 and then it's $50 a month every time after that. And you're like, what is happening? Which is why I love Truebill. Truebill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people can save up to $720 a year with Truebill. And because companies make subscriptions so hard to cancel, they make it incredibly simple. And you just link your accounts and Truebill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap. They have over 2 million users and have helped them save over $100 million. Like I said at the beginning, one of my pet peeves is just when you forget that you signed up for those things, which is why I have loved Truebill, because I'm like, oh, wait, I didn't know that I was paying for this. I didn't realize that, we had 2 different Netflix subscriptions. True story happening at our house. But Truebill helps identify these things for me, and I can fix it with a tap of a button, and they help me save. So don't fall for the subscription scam. Start canceling today at truebill.com/mamas. Go right now to truebill.com/mamas. It could save you thousands a year. Truebill.com/mamas.
So how was your NICU? How long were they in the NICU? And what was that journey like? First of all, I want to say, NICU nurses are amazing. They're I feel like the best people on earth.
They are 100%. And we've stayed friends with a lot of them. They are, oh my gosh, they're heroes. Everyone that works in a NICU is a hero. And so they were their total stay was 122 days. It was crazy. They went home on the same day, which never happens with twins. So they came home 1 day short of their 4-month birthday. So they were on ventilators for 7 weeks, and they were both able to transition off to a CPAP, which kind of looks like what, you might know if you know an adult that has a CPAP. Gavin had it's called a PDA ligation. So basically there was a vessel that was open that should have been closed. So they had to do a heart vessel surgery when he was still a pound. Honestly, the scariest day was probably about 4 or so days in. They were both diagnosed with, it's called intraventricular hemorrhages. So basically it's bleeding in the brain from the high oxygen pressure that they have. And they're graded 1 through 4. So Hannah had a 2, which is relatively mild, moderate. And then Gavin had a 2 on one side and a 4 on his other side. So, social work started coming in. Our hospital was always supportive of us. I've heard crazy stories of places when a baby has a grade 4 where they say they talk comfort care and end of life. That was never a thing for us. That was never a question. Baby was fighting, we were fighting. But he did have the highest level of a brain bleed. So that was probably our hardest day, because we weren't going to know what that was going to look like for a few years, because you don't know until you start seeing, are they meeting their milestones? You have no idea. The risk that is involved with that is cerebral palsy. So, and he does have mild CP. We can talk about that later if you want to, but, that was going back to me being a PT. I hadn't done much peds, but I had seen some pediatrics with CP. And so that gave me really mixed feelings, because I knew how hard it could be, but I also loved these kiddos that I'd worked with before and seen how hard they'd worked. So I was like, you know what, no matter what, we'll get him the best therapy we need, whatever. We're just going to do it. We're just going to, take care of whatever he needs. So anyway, so they went to the CPAP. They eventually went home when they had a nasal cannula. And then they went home on oxygen, just similar cannula like we are used to seeing with adults, just much, much tinier. So they went home on oxygen. They had what's called apnea monitors. So monitors with the strap around their belly to track their breathing and their heart rate, to make sure that they didn't stop breathing, to make sure that they didn't drop their heart rate or anything like that. And we had those for a few more months. And then they were able to both come off oxygen at around 6 and 7 months. So yeah. And then they were home with us.
Yeah. That's such a roller coaster of a journey. I'm sure emotionally and then physically you're healing. But you're also in the NICU. Did you have you had no other kids, right? At this point?
No,
right.
I didn't.
Right.
And that would, I could spend all my time in the NICU. That I have such respect for mamas that are NICU mamas with other kiddos at home, because that has got to be so hard splitting your time. So we did not have that. Both of our kiddos were there together.
Mm-hmm. And then all of this ended up leading you to write a book. So tell us about, then you wrote another one. So tell us about your books.
So, first of all, I think when I was going through it, and I think this is pretty common when I've talked to other NICU parents, some people go through a lot mentally when they are in it. My brain I just kept go until they were about 2. And I think when they were about 2 and they were much more medically stable, that's when I really started to kind of look back and process everything. And that's kind of when I had to go through more of my mental, emotional healing journey. My physical healing journey, and this is a lot about what prompted me to write my second book, which I'll talk about in a minute. I was a pelvic floor PT. I work with pregnant and postpartum moms every day. I totally ignored my own rehab because I didn't care, because my kids were in the NICU. And I was so, of course, which is normal, focusing on them, that I ignored the fact that I'd been pregnant. I ignored the fact that I'd had a C-section. I just put all of my focus on them. And so, again, that's what really inspired the second book, which I can chat about in a minute. But the first, when I was going through it, I'm a big reader, and I was looking for resources that were not like textbook resources, that were more like people's journeys. And there just wasn't a lot out there. There's a little bit more now. And so the first book I wrote, I published when they were around 3, and it was basically their NICU journey and story. I wanted kind of more of a true account from a mom, as opposed to just like, this is what textbooks say, this is what the statistics say. And I was very honest. I put the good and the bad in there, but I also wanted to just give people hope, because it's terrifying and it's scary. And I wanted people to see the story of some kiddos that made it through. And, Gavin had a grade 4 brain bleed, but here he is today, running, jumping, preschool, all the normal things. And then Hannah, totally great. And so my main purpose for the first one was to have the story of their own birth for the kids, and then to help other people that might be either going through the same thing or another like medical journey or different things like that. So then this year, now that they're 8, that's when I decided to publish my newest book. And this is different. It's called the NICU Mama Survival Guide. So basically I use my knowledge as a pelvic floor PT and my knowledge as a NICU mom, because again, I just totally ignored my own rehab. And I think that's very common for NICU moms. And I realized after all these years and just seeing more and more moms, it doesn't have to be that way. There's a way that you can still address your own postpartum recovery right there at your baby's bedside. And so I really tried to make it, really it would be good for any postpartum mom, but there's just lots of modifications of like, okay, just do this simple breathing technique right when you're sitting there at the isolette. Like I tried to make it to where it was very realistic, because we know NICU moms, moms in general, but NICU moms especially, they don't have any extra time. If they're home, they're showering and they're eating and sleeping, and then they're going right back to the NICU. And so, it's super easy to say, do all these things, but it just wasn't realistic for my situation. And so I really tried to make it as NICU specific as I could. But I also, so a lot of it's physical recovery. So things like posture, going into a lot of things that are super common after either vaginal delivery or C-section. So things like perineal tears. What if you're leaking urine? What if you're having pain with intercourse when you get back to it? What if you feel like pelvic pressure? All of those very, very common things. And then there's a couple sections on sort of the mental health aspect of the NICU itself. Return to activity, because I did everything wrong, even though I knew better. Like I ignored my rehab, and then I was so stressed out that when I was released to run, I went and ran, which is not what we say to do at all. But I just had to relieve stress somehow. So there's better ways to get into that. And so it's all about like the physical recovery, the mental recovery. Then there's tons of resources in the back, and then like other advice from other NICU moms. And so my purpose was kind of current NICU mamas, but then also I call them the NICU mama veterans, which is like what I consider myself, because it's super common that your NICU baby may be 5 years old, 10 years old, and you've never really addressed a lot of these issues. And maybe you're still leaking, or maybe you're, having pain with painful sex and things like that. So all those things can still be addressed. There's not a time limit to it or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's my new passion.
That's awesome. And I feel like so many people can relate. Like you said, I feel like just moms in general find a hard time to get that care. But then especially at the NICU, that's your life when your kids are in there. Mm-hmm. And you really, you can't think about anything else. So to have a resource like that is amazing. I mean, like I've never heard of it before. So when you had reached out, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Like I've never,
Well, I'm trying to get, like, I know we're starting kind of locally. It's on Amazon, but I'm starting to pair with different hospitals locally. And we're starting with the hospital, the NICU that we were actually in, where different companies like doctors' offices are basically sponsoring these books. And so they'll buy and they'll supply 100 books, so that my goal is to get like as many new mamas to just get it like in their hospital bag, because again, they don't have time to necessarily go shopping, and they might not know about it. So I'm trying to just get it out there as much as possible, just to be like a resource for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even for doulas like me, it'd be good to have on hand in case any of your clients have a baby that ends up in a NICU, that you can just, give it to them and have it be a resource. Because the NICUs, I mean, in your case, you knew your kids were going to go to the NICU. And that happens with a lot of premature babies. Like, that they're kind of going to go there. But it's still nothing that you can ever plan or prepare for.
Right. Well, and then some people, I mean, I've made a lot of friends through this whole journey. And I mean, I've made friends who they delivered at 41 weeks and they had absolutely no idea there was going to be any issue. And either something happened at delivery or there was a condition they weren't prepared for. And so, and then the NICU stay, I mean, yeah, we were there for 4 months, but you don't have to be there for 4 months. You can be there for 3 days and it can still be hugely traumatic. And it can still be enough to make you completely focus on your baby and not yourself, which is kind of what we all do as moms anyway. And so it doesn't matter. I don't want people to feel like they have to be in their NICU for that long. Like, it doesn't matter. If you're a NICU mom, you are a NICU mom. Like, it doesn't matter if you were there for 6 hours, you experienced the NICU. So yeah, it's a very unique place. I feel like it's just something hard to imagine until you go through it. But yeah, my goal, it kind of just merges my two passions. My two passions are NICU moms and pelvic floor physical therapy. And it was just a way to kind of merge everything together to help more people that I try to get as many people as I can.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to have to check out your book because, well, Jovi came at 41 weeks and she was in the NICU. And I wonder if like there's anything there that I wonder like if there'd be anything that would come up for me and my husband, because I know things came up for him when we were listening back to her birth story and we were watching her video, but when we were preparing for this baby, and a lot came up for him. And I think that the partners kind of get overlooked a lot because they go through trauma too.
Absolutely.
But they don't have the physical trauma that we do.
But they have the same, like that situation where my husband was like, what do I do? My wife is laying here in the middle of a surgery. They just took my 2 kids upstairs. They're not breathing. Like, what do I do? I mean, I'm sure that was very traumatic. So yeah, I've made a lot of friends through this whole journey, and the partners are very affected because they want to be able to help everyone and they can't. I mean, there's nothing they can really do in that situation. So
right.
So, yeah.
You realize really quickly so much is out of your control.
Yes.
But I feel like for me, I definitely did go into that fight or flight, and I kind of numbed myself, and I felt very disconnected from Jovi until she was probably 4 months old. And she was there for a week. She was in the NICU for a week, came home. It was very emotional, but I'd love to read your book to see if there's like underneath stuff there that emotionally, because I feel like I haven't really unpacked it still.
Well, and I was the same way. Like I was saying, I didn't emotionally begin to unpack things until at least 2. And I think, part of it's just your brain protecting you. Like you said, you almost do have that numbness because if you tried to absorb it all at once, it would just be so much. It would just be so overwhelming. And so, when my kids were more stable, that's really when I had to start like doing more actual work to go through things. And everyone's different. I mean, some people it may be immediately, some people it may be 10 years later. You have to kind of just meet your body where it is, and whether it's your physical body or your mental health, and just kind of, all of it's okay, and just meet your body where it is and get the help that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd love to dive into more of the pelvic floor therapy stuff because you said that's a passion of yours too, and you love to combine the two. When, as a NICU mom, there's obviously really hard to find time to do pelvic floor stuff. And then I feel like now just being a mom in general, I'm like, I was telling my husband the other night, I'm finally getting in the swing of like not feeling overwhelmed. I mean, there's definitely times and moments every day where I feel overwhelmed, but, to where I'm like, okay, not everything's getting on top of me. And I have these pelvic floor exercises that I need to be doing. And I told him, I'm like, I feel like I can't even find 15 minutes a day to do this.
Right. Well, so first of all, a couple things with that. So first of all, super normal, right? And we try to, and that's one thing I think I've gotten better at as a mom versus when I was a pelvic PT before I was a mom. And it doesn't have to even be a mom. It could be just someone who has a busy job or something like that. There's the ideal. And then there's also like, okay, but what's real life? Because I have a newborn and a toddler. So like, what are the most important things? If I only have time for one thing today, a lot of what we teach our patients is things that are functional. So things that you're doing anyway. So for example, we know that you're picking up your baby a million times a day. And we know that you're picking up a car seat, and a car seat is heavy and the toddler is heavy. So we want to make sure you're doing that correctly. So we want to make sure that you have proper posture. We want to make sure, so here's a little tip you can just for people, we always tell people you want to blow out when you have exertion. So like if you're lifting your baby or if you are lifting your toddler, you want to blow out. We tend to do the opposite. We tend to kind of like almost hold our breath sometimes. And all that air pressure is going to push, it's going to find your weakest link. So if your weakest link is your pelvic floor, it can push on your pelvic organs. It can cause leakage. If you have any like abdominal separation, like diastasis, which almost every mom does by the end of their pregnancy, it can push on there. So, we try to, again, make the exercises as much like, okay, when you're doing this already, do it this way. One thing we always tell people, so everyone's kind of heard about Kegels, right? So they've heard about pelvic floor muscle contractions. It's really important for everyone, but especially after you've had a baby, sometimes pelvic floor muscle contractions are not really where you want to start, because the pelvic floor needs to be able to relax all the way, and then it needs to be able to contract all the way. And a lot of times after pregnancy and delivery, no matter how you deliver, there can be too much pelvic floor muscle tension. So different signs of that might be any discomfort in the pelvic area, any painful intercourse, trouble getting your urine stream started, things like feeling like you can't empty your urine all the way, feeling like you go to the bathroom all the time. Like those can all be signs that you might have some tension. So in an ideal world, everyone would in our dream world, we would see every single mom after she's had a baby. Mm-hmm. We would love that. France is doing that already, because you really need to kind of find out, okay, do I need to work on relaxing these muscles first, or is that okay? And I can go right ahead and focus on strengthening, because you really want to be able to do both. So, that's one plug for, if you can see a pelvic floor physical therapist, obviously that's the best option. But the next best option is to kind of think about your symptoms. Am I showing signs of tension? Then maybe I need to work on some breathing and focusing on relaxing my pelvic floor first. If I feel like I'm okay there, then I can start working into some pelvic floor muscle strengthening as long as no symptoms arise. And in terms of fitting things in, sometimes patients will do things while they're feeding their baby, whether that's breastfeeding or bottle feeding or however they're doing that. Sometimes we'll have people, do it while you brush your teeth. But like the big thing is like, those are great, but we really want to focus on those functional things, because it's really all about what you're doing for the whole rest of your day. And as moms, you're squatting, you're deadlifting, you're doing these things. You just don't realize you're doing them, but you're doing them when you're taking care of your kids and your house and things like that. So a lot of it is like, okay, let's make sure you're doing all those things well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. I mean, and I forget about that too. Like I forget that when I'm going up the stairs, I can engage my core and, make sure I'm using good posture when I'm going up. Like I forget that, like I'll try to do pelvic floor breathing at the end of the day, but like I forget that throughout the day I can be practicing these things. I just think in my mind like, oh, I need to take the time to sit down and do my clams and to do my, like other things that my pelvic floor therapist told me to do that I'm not doing. So.
Just posture by itself is so huge, and regular posture, and then posture holding your baby, because that's what you're doing a lot of. And so, we really want people to, so another little tip, and you probably know this from your pelvic PT, but like we want to try to keep your ribs and your pelvis in line. So a lot of times with pregnancy and postpartum, some moms will kind of do where they sway their back and stick their butt out to where they have a big sway in their back. Sometimes moms will do where they kind of tuck their butt under and kind of over clench their glutes. That's a big one with baby wearing. Mm-hmm. Baby wearing is good, but you got to make sure you're doing it right. We see the tuck under and glute squeeze way too much with baby wearing. So make sure, like when you're just doing daily life, just stop in every once in a while and think, are my ribs and my pelvis engaged? Are my lower abdominals a little bit engaged? Not huge, but a little bit engaged. Pelvic floor should be pretty relaxed at neutral, engaging when you need it, such as if you're lifting or if you're sneezing or things like that. So, just checking in with your posture throughout the day is really important, especially because all new moms are tired, right? You're tired from lack of sleep. You're tired from everything you're doing. We all have worse posture when we're tired. And so that's why you might feel achy by the end of the day and things like that. So, pay attention to that at the end of the day. And I think the other thing about being a new mom, give yourself a lot of grace. Like Do your things if you can. If you miss a day, do not beat yourself up. You are surviving right now.
Yeah.
Different things like drinking water, things like that, that's really important too. So count all those things as taking good care of yourself. And then, sometimes just if you have the support, if you have a partner or if you have a best friend or a mom or somebody, sometimes just taking 10 minutes to just have to yourself and just simply breathing is the best type of PT you can do too. Mm-hmm. So all those things count. All those things are really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good reminder. I have a question about, so this is my TMI question. And my other question is about hemorrhoids. So I got a hemorrhoid with my daughter Jovi, but it really wasn't that painful. This time around, got another one. So I have two that are visible, very painful. And I haven't talked to my pelvic floor therapist about it yet, just that PT can help hemorrhoids. And then I've also been noticing that it's like the weirdest feeling. I'll just be sitting there and I think because I did pelvic floor therapy before I ever gave birth, even to my first daughter, that helped so much with like bladder control. So like I've never just like peed my pants or done anything like that. When I was pregnant, if I'd sneeze and I wasn't engaged, I would pee a little bit. But lately, like the last week or so, I'll randomly get this feeling that like almost I'm farting, but I'm not. It's like my sphincter completely relaxes or like does something. I don't know how to describe it. It's just almost like it'd be something that I would actively do, but I'm not actively doing it. It just like randomly happens. And I'm like, that's weird.
But it feels more like a release than a squeeze.
I think so.
Okay.
And I'm like, what is happening? Because I'm not actually like farting or doing anything. It's just like all of a sudden there's like it's almost like a.
Okay. So let me start with the hemorrhoid question.
Yeah.
So hemorrhoids, super common with pregnancy, delivery. A lot of people will have them even outside of that, just from things like chronic constipation, things of that sort. So lots of things we can help with. So the biggest thing with hemorrhoids, I feel like, is good bowel health and then pressure management. Okay. So the best way to, and you may know this from your pelvic floor PT, but in case any of your listeners haven't, we at our clinic so you want to get in the best toileting posture possible. And our westernized toilets don't really do that. So I love the squatty potty. If anyone's not familiar with the squatty potties are basically little step stools that raise your feet up about 7 to 9 inches. And then they have a cutout to where you can push them back against your toilet. So they're kind of out of the way so you don't trip in the middle of the night. The idea is if you elevate your feet on the squatty potty and kind of lean your forearms forward, that puts you in a better position to where the pelvic floor muscle that wraps around the rectum, it can relax better. And it also changes sort of the angle that your stool is going through. So instead of going kind of around a corner, it's more of a straight shot. So it makes it just easier to have a bowel movement. The other big thing with that is when you don't want to strain, but when you have that urge to kind of like do a gentle bear down, we teach people to either blow out, so like blow out through pursed lips, or to make the sound shh, kind of like you're telling someone to be quiet. And the reason why is if you kind of close off at your glottis, which is kind of like at the base of your throat, it traps that air pressure. So this goes back to similar to like blowing out while you lift. And that air pressure is going to push down, which can make your hemorrhoids worse. It could also make any pelvic organ prolapse worse or leakage or things like that. So whenever you have a bowel movement, you want to elevate your feet, lean your forearms onto the thighs, and blow out while you gently bear down. So that's one tip. You definitely want to just have good bowel health, because if you're constipated, that's going to make hemorrhoids just 100% worse and miserable. Mm-hmm. So that can be a lot of things. So that, of course, you want to drink a lot of water. It's really hard for new moms. You're really busy. But I have so many patients that they'll come in and I'll ask how their bowel health is. And they'll say, oh, I was constipated this week, but I know it's because I didn't drink enough water. So it just goes hand in hand. So making sure you're doing that. again, hard as a new mom, and I've got this in some ideas in my book, but things like trying to get some good fiber, and that doesn't mean, processed bars. That can mean things like, berries and things of that sort to kind of make sure your stool is nice and soft. And there's different recipes we'll give to people if they feel like they're having trouble with that kind of combines some things like prune juice with pulp, unprocessed oat wheat bran, things like that to kind of soften things up and get things moving. But you just don't want to have that hard stool. So those are kind of the big two things with hemorrhoids. And there's over-the-counter treatments and things like that, but you just don't want them to keep coming back. So treating them to kind of make them be less painful, but then also good bowel health and as close as you can get to that really good squatty potty position. Mm-hmm. For any NICU mamas that are listening, you go to the bathroom in the NICU for, like in my case, 4 months. What you can do, well, it depends on your bathroom. So we had a bathroom where it was a single, so you could just go in and lock the door. You can take a trash can, turn it over, put your feet up on that. It's also a really super good trick if anyone is pregnant, when you go to have your baby in the hospital and you go to have that first postpartum poop, whether that's vaginal delivery or C-section, that can be pretty scary. Put your feet up on that hospital trash can. That can make all the difference. So I think that's most of the advice I would. Oh, the other thing with hemorrhoids, I see a lot of hemorrhoids aggravated. Earlier when we were talking about the moms that kind of tuck their butts under and clench with or without baby wearing, that'll aggravate those hemorrhoids too, because you're essentially clamping right down on where they are. So make sure you have ribs over pelvis and your pelvis isn't pushed forward and your glute muscles clenched, because that'll aggravate your hemorrhoids for sure. Mm-hmm.
I've dealt with constipation for the first time, like in my life, postpartum, and I drink so much water. I drink 100 ounces a day at least, and I've been eating prunes, and I'm like, this is the first time I've ever had constipation ever. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, it's so annoying.
Okay, so we're going along the TMI, so hopefully you're okay answering this question. But since you brought up your constipation, are you going a few days in between bowel movements, or are you going every day? Okay, so one other thing you can try if you're going several days without a bowel movement. So, and this can be, obviously can contribute to the stool getting harder and larger, which makes it more difficult to pass. You can do something that's called abdominal bowel massage. And basically it's just taking your hand, it won't help your listeners if I show you. So I'm going to try to describe it as best I can. So when you eat your food, it goes into your stomach, it goes into your small intestines kind of in the middle, and then it goes into your large intestines. And your large intestines start on your lower right side of your abdomen, go up till about your ribs-ish. Everyone's a little different. Goes across, goes back down your left, and then kind of curves and goes out. So what you can do is just take a couple fingers, or you can take a flat hand and kind of massage starting at the lower right side. And then you just kind of follow the path of the large intestines. So you just kind of go up the right side to underneath the rib cage, then you go across, and then you go down, and you go a little slower than what I just described. You're not actually pushing the stool through. Basically what the idea is you're kind of waking up those muscles of the large intestines and basically telling them to do their job, which is to squeeze and to move that through to where you can become kind of more regular. Mm-hmm. So I would say try doing some like 5 minutes of abdominal bowel massage, trying to do it a couple times a day. You can do it laying down, you can do it seated, however you want to. Sometimes getting a little bit of something warm to drink in the morning and doing, get a little food, get a little warm something, even if it's warm water, do some bowel massage, and then just go sit on the toilet for 5 minutes and just kind of see what happens. Mm-hmm. Nothing happens in 5 minutes, go ahead and, come off and move on. But sometimes just doing all those things and then sitting on the toilet can actually get things moving as well too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll have to try that. Yeah, because I'm a pretty regular person, like once or twice a day, and now it's like every couple of days, and it's just hard. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm drinking water, I'm eating prunes. I don't know what you want from me, body.
Yeah. Try the bowel massage, try the warmth in the water and the sitting down. And I do feel like, I know you told me you're about 6 weeks postpartum. There's a lot of adjustments still going on right now, hormone wise, things like that, but do all those best things that you can. But, things can sometimes often start to just get a little bit better as you get a little further out as well. Mm-hmm. But definitely try the abdominal bowel massage, try the squatty potty position if you're not doing that. All of those techniques will help too.
Yes. Yeah. I'm a huge squatty potty person. I've put my feet on plenty of trash cans.
Love the squatty potty. Yes. And I've had patients use all kinds of things like, I have one patient right now and she takes 2 yoga blocks and turns them over because she has a camper and they travel in their camper and the bathroom's not very big. And so it's not wide enough for the full squatty potty. So she takes 2 yoga blocks and she props her feet up on those and that works great. And I've had a lot of people will use, like, if they have a toddler who uses like a step stool to get up to the sink, that can work okay too. The squatty potty is just kind of the best one because it shoves out of the way. So when you're up in the middle of the night and you're groggy and it's dark, you don't trip over it.
Right.
So
right.
They even have ones with lights. They're really great. They have all kinds, and they have options for kids. If anyone has a young child, because so many kids have constipation, they have kid-sized ones with cute characters and things like that too.
Interesting. Yeah. I haven't even thought about a kid's one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll have to do the massage.
Yes. Try the abdominal bowel massage and let me know how that goes for sure.
Yeah, I will. There's just so many things that end up happening postpartum, and you kind of have to relearn your body too.
You do. You completely do. And I even tell people that during pregnancy. I feel like there's so many times you go in and your body's almost different every single day. Or like you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, this is totally different, whatever it is. And then after you have your baby, then you absolutely have to learn it all again. We really, at our clinic here, we really try to get across to people because a lot of people want to jump back into things too soon. They really try to put pressure on themselves to either lose the baby weight or get back into whatever sport they were doing. And so we really try to emphasize, like, your body just did a huge thing. You just grew a human for 9 to 10 months. If you had a vaginal delivery, your pelvic floor muscles stretch like 300% of their normal length. If
oh
you
my
had
gosh.
You had a major abdominal surgery that
right.
cuts through like layers. And a lot of times it's just brushed aside because so many women have millions of people have babies every year, but that doesn't mean it's any less of a big thing that your body does. Mm-hmm. And so we really try to get across to people, like, your body went through something huge. And now on top of that, you're not getting a lot of sleep. You're caring for someone all the time. So we really try to tell people, you really have healing for at least up to 3 months after you have a baby or after you have your surgery. If you're breastfeeding, your hormones are still going to be different for a long time with that as well. And so, give yourself a lot of grace and then don't jump back into things too soon because, it's just your body did a really big thing. And so we try to get our mamas to really realize, like, yeah, that was pretty awesome that I did that. And I do need to take care of myself after.
And get a pelvic floor therapist.
And get a pelvic floor therapist, 100%. Yes, for sure.
But it is crazy how society is kind of like, how we even are like, well, I had a baby. Like, yeah, it's a big thing, but life goes on and I have to keep up with it, right? Like, yeah. I feel like as a society, I think because it's so common. I mean, we have babies every day, all the time. And so It's not viewed as this huge thing that it is. And so it's hard to get into that mindset. And then the people around you get into that mindset because they're like, oh, well, you just keep popping out kids and life keeps going. And it's like, okay, but like you said, your body just did a crazy thing.
And I can't tell you how many patients we have that come in that say, or people I know, friends, family, that just kind of blow it off like, oh, I can't jump on the trampoline with my kid because I peed, but I had a baby. Like, we call that common, but not normal, meaning that this happens to millions of people all over. So you shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed, but it's something that you can fix. Like, don't just settle for like, well, I had a baby, so now I just wear a pad when I go out with my friends because I pee when I laugh. Like, those things are okay, but let's fix it. Like, don't be ashamed, but let's also make it so you don't have to deal with it anymore. Or like, oh, sex has been uncomfortable ever since I've had my baby. Well, then let's fix that. Like, let's not just say, well, that's just what happens. It's common, but there's ways to make that go away. So yeah, it's getting better. Word's starting to get out more. We're still working on it. We push it as much as we can as pelvic floor PTs, but it is pretty cool. I've noticed, I just talked to a patient this morning, women are starting to talk about it a little bit more. I have a couple sets of best friends, and it's not just younger women, it's older women too. Like, I have a couple ladies right now in their 70s, and one came in for something and she told her BFF. And so now her best friend's coming in. I have a husband and a wife coming in right now because they're both having different issues. So people are starting to talk about it more, but we really just want to keep pushing that as much as we can because, every new mom deserves to recover from her pregnancy and delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I do hear people talking about it more for sure. And that it's not, because I grew up hearing, I guess, the older generation being like, well, when you have kids, you're just going to pee your pants. That's what happens.
Yeah. Well, and we also see, and this is kind of not exactly what we've been talking about, but we see a lot of patients for pelvic pain with different things like endometriosis is a big one. Well, there's a genetic factor to that. So a daughter may have these terrible periods that keep her home from school, and they think that's normal because mom had that and aunt had that. And it's really just because everyone had the same problem, but it's just kind of passed off as normal. So yeah, there's a lot of education that still needs to get out about pelvic health, but it's getting there. It's getting better.
Mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, I have two questions. You had mentioned like a husband and a wife coming in. What are like the pelvic, I guess, why would a guy come to you? That's also something that's not really talked about.
Yeah. And the guys are not quite doing as well as women in terms of talking amongst themselves for sure. Mm-hmm. So they kind of fall into a few different categories. It's very similar with women, but it just kind of presents differently. So a lot of my males I see now also have pelvic floor muscle tension that we talked about, like after having the baby, how you can have painful intercourse, different things like that. I have a gentleman right now, his primary symptoms, and I hear this a lot from men. They'll either feel like when they're either sitting on a golf ball or they might have testicular pain. Those are two big signs of pelvic floor muscle tension. Also like urinary dysfunction. So feeling like you need to go to the bathroom all the time or feeling like you can't get all the urine out. His description of his bowel dysfunction was pooping around something. Like he felt like he had to he couldn't get his whole bowel movement out because like something was in the way, which actually was just muscle tension. So that's a big one. So we will see them for basically pain, bladder issues, and things like constipation as well. We also have a large group of men post-prostate cancer. So a lot of them will have prostatectomies where they remove the prostate. The two very common symptoms after that are incontinence and erectile dysfunction. So that's a big bulk of them. Sometimes other treatments for that cancer will give them some issues as well, but the prostatectomy is a big one. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, our pelvic pain patients, we see that all across the board, but we see a lot of young, healthy, active men that are like, what on earth is happening? Because they consider like, I'm not older. But yeah, it tends to really hit young, healthy, active men.
That's interesting.
Some of that's just from clenching their muscles, and teaching them how to, same like with our women, you don't want to clench your pelvic floor all the time. You don't want to clench your abs all the time. A lot of times people are just clenching those abdominals all the time, and that can lead to some pelvic floor tension as well. So yeah, those are kind of our big ones for men.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. Before we wrap up, I would love for you to share where people can get your two books at, and then where they can find and follow you.
For sure. So both of my books are on Amazon. So my first one is called Learning to Breathe, and that's the one that is the NICU journey for my twins. The second one is called the NICU Mama Survival Guide, and that's also on Amazon. The best places to find me, Instagram. I actually have two Instagram accounts right now. Hopefully someday I'll merge them. My pelvic physical therapy account is Heather Evans DPT, which is Doctor of Physical Therapy. And then more of my book, NICU family one, is currently under Learning to Breathe book. And then the clinic that I work at, you can check that out too, because we do offer virtual sessions and things like that if you're not local to Kansas City where we are. Our company is called Empower Your Pelvis, and that is just at empoweryourpelvis.com.
Awesome. And I will include all of that in the show notes for those listening. So thank you so much, Heather, for coming on and for sharing your incredible story with us. Thank you for writing these books and then answering all of my TMI questions.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening, guys. I'm so grateful for Heather for coming on. Make sure you check out her books. I linked the one in the show notes, Learning to Breathe, and then also where you can find her on social media to find out more about everything that she's doing in the NICU Mama Survival Guide. So I'm just grateful that she had a heart to write these things and that there's people out there who need them. So, all right, I'm going to talk to you guys next week. I love you. Thank you for your time, taking the time to listen to this, and I will see you next week. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.